My name is Eric Marsh, and I am a pastor here in Long Beach. I lead something called the Long Beach Church Collective, and with me are four of my friends, Jaci Anderson from Long Beach Christian Fellowship, Beth Balmer from Grace Long Beach, Robert Aboites from Revive, and John Rosene from The Garden. Today we're going to talk about questions that churches are talking about in the middle of the pandemic. We're all in the middle of COVID. We're recording this on the last day of April, and it may be different. Everything might be different in a week, but we're all doing something now. We've all adjusted to the short term. We're all meeting on Zoom or YouTube in some way. We're having small groups. We're having a Sunday worship experience. We've all adjusted during the short term on day 47 or whatever it is of COVID. What I actually ask these leaders to gather to discuss and to talk about is, given your context, given where we are, what questions are you asking right now for the short term, for this spring and this summer? And then we'll take the second part of our conversation and we'll talk about how are you thinking about the long term, the future. But to kick us off, I'd like just to take a couple of minutes and Jaci, would you just tell us a little bit about your context, and then you can pass the mic to the next person.
Sure. So yeah, my name is Jaci Anderson, and I'm the pastor of missional development at Long Beach Christian Fellowship. And from starting in the beginning of February until last Sunday, we were in a transition of saying farewell to our lead pastor. And so now I am officially a co-interim pastor. We were leading as a triad, so to speak, and now I'm wearing lots of hats. And literally 3 days after our lead pastor gave his last message, we were meeting together as the Long Beach Church Collective, talking about, COVID-19. And so I instantly was, part of designing what I thought was short-term and is now becoming some long-term changes. So yeah, we're feeling it in all those ways. We're a contemplative, charismatic church, so that shapes a little bit of who we are and what we do.
Great. Thank you for being here. John?
Yeah, my name is John Rosene. I'm the senior associate pastor at Garden Church here in Long Beach, a church. I don't think we can call ourselves a church plant anymore because we've been here for 10 years. Yeah, we are a church in the city. We love this city, and we love what Long Beach represents, and even what this panel represents, is the unity that we have here in the city. It's really beautiful and special, and it's a privilege to be a part of this time here.
Where do you guys meet, John? Tell everybody where you meet.
That's great. Well, I mean, yeah, what do you mean? I mean, right here, wherever you are. We did meet at Franklin Middle School in downtown Long Beach, 7th and Cerritos. And so TBD for what that looks like here on out.
Fantastic. Thank you for being with us. And Mrs. Balmer.
Yeah, I'm Beth Balmer. I am in the executive pastor seat at Grace Long Beach, kind of the opposite end of the spectrum from the Garden. We've been around this city for, I think, 120 years now. And we've actually been in a co-leadership model for the last couple of years as well. And we're in a transition of going from a 2 to a 3 in that, which is obviously in the current season, things are slightly different, but myself and Daniel Long have been co-leading over there for like the last 2 years, I think.
Great. Thank you for being here. And Robert?
Yeah, hey, my name is Robert Aboites. I'm the executive pastor for Revive Church in Long Beach. We used to be 7th Street Church, but then we expanded. We got some additional campuses, and so it didn't make sense to call ourselves 7th Street anymore, since none of those other campuses are on 7th Street. And so we have 3 locations in Long Beach, on 7th and Obispo, and then also on 11th and Junipero, and then on Atlantic and right around 51st Street in North Long Beach. And then we also have a campus in El Monte. But yeah, I'm here just representing Revive. Also, I'm the COO for Urban Youth Workers Institute, and we've been wrestling with some similar questions in terms of how a faith-based nonprofit organization is going to look in the future. But here today, I'm representing our church and the questions that we're asking about how we move forward.
Great. Thank you guys for being here and for sharing a little bit about your context. I want to break this conversation into 2 parts. And I want to use the imagery from an article written by an organization called Praxis. Many people know about Andy Crouch. He's a leader and a writer. The organization Praxis works with leaders who aspire to redemptive leadership. So they work with Christian entrepreneurs, they work with pastors, they work with leaders at organizations like the one that Robert also runs with urban youth workers. They wrote an article about the season we're in right now with COVID, and they use the imagery of winter. So they use blizzard to describe the current situation we're in, where we're all having to shelter, and during a crazy blizzard, you batten down the hatches and you stay inside no matter what. They also use the imagery of winter, and that being that after we get through this immediate stage of our immediate blizzard, we're going to have potentially a very, very long winter in which things change. We think about the Ice Age, everything changed with the Ice Age. So I want to use those two images today. And I want to begin with that of the blizzard. So a couple of questions that I just want to throw out. The first one being, what are the most important questions that you're asking as a church leadership team, as your elders, about the rest of the spring? We begin May tomorrow, and then we're probably going to have shelter in place, at least for some period, as it affects us as churches through the summer. So what are you asking?
I think one of the questions that we're asking is, are we asking questions too soon? We're trying to answer questions too soon for us right now. I think something that's guided us, are we trying to put handles on this too soon? Are we trying to create a structure that is too rigid too soon? As much as there's smart people out there, and each of you are developing a plan, we're doing the same. I don't know if any of us really know what to expect in the next months to years. And so really trying to be, the questions we're asking ourselves organizationally, and this is, we're borrowing this from others as well. Are we fast right now? Are we fluid? And are we flexible? And what are the things that we're doing in the midst of that? Are we fast? Are we more like a cruise ship right now? Or are we like a speedboat? Where are we fluid? Where do we need to adapt? Where do we need to start thinking ourselves in a different light? And I think most importantly, the question right now is, are we flexible? Staff-wise, organizationally, can we, the hashtag we have in our staff that I ask myself every day is blessed are the flexible, because it seems like everything is changing, and that needs to be kind of a mantra right now. So I think, those are some of the initial questions that I have, that we're asking ourselves right now.
Yeah, I feel like we're still in that a similar boat of even reevaluating. It almost seems like on a weekly basis of the things that we think we've landed on, and then every week it's like we're having to reassess and reevaluate that. So that applies to like what we're doing, and then also the forms and the mediums that we're using, because even then it's like we think we've got something, and then somebody points out another way or a better way or a problem with the system. So I understand that, the idea that we're sort of coming through the blizzard part and moving into the winter, but I feel like we're still on the back end of the blizzard, trying to figure out whether what we think we've landed on is even the right things for this week, let alone the week after, let alone the month after. So
I saw on Instagram, Beth, I thought this was really a wise decision. I saw that you were soliciting input from the congregation just to say, are you hearing us? Is this helpful? What would be better? I thought that was great to get feedback. Jaci?
Yeah, well, we did something, similar, just trying to posture ourselves in more of a question asking stance. And some of that had to do with, we had hired a consultant to help us in our leadership transition. So we're in the midst of getting a lot of data just, about the community, which is super helpful. But one of the first things we did was distribute an asset and vulnerability assessment, where we wanted to make sure that we were looking at, the provision that we had and matching that, and not trying to save the world. And I mean, I was seeing those first few days tweets of 35 things that you can do to be missional to your neighbors. And I was like, this is bananas. Like, calm down, you know, take a deep breath. So we asked, like, what are the 2 things that we can be about right now, especially in light of our transition? And for our staff, you know, it was self-care, kind of put the oxygen mask on yourself first as you're in your household and, you know, parenting or helping older age parents and everything in between. And then community care. And we based that community care on assessing the assets that people had to offer and the vulnerabilities that we were hearing in our community. And then we've been trying to match that. That's looked like, you know, distributing a list of educator, you know, tutor, educator, and some of their different levels of, you know, expertise to parents to help with, you know, school support. Some folks who are calling our frontline healthcare workers who have experience, they may be retired nurses, things like that, to give kind of a more experienced ear and encouragement to the folks in our community who are on the front lines with our healthcare response. And then mobilizing benevolence. We had a lot of people who financially said, hey, we're doing well. We have a lot, you know, we want to offer. And then matching that with the vulnerabilities of folks in our community who are feeling it hit a little harder. So those are some of the questions we've been working through. And yeah, like Beth said, we put everything on Zoom and thought, okay, great, we're doing small groups on Zoom. People want to connect. And then we were hearing, we have Zoom fatigue, you know, so we're like, oh, okay, constantly adapting.
Thank you. Robert?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, the very first thing we thought about was that, you know, our people are our greatest asset, not the buildings. And so we immediately moved to kind of an operational, what I call keep the lights on. So we trimmed everything that we could right away because we really realized this was not going to be something that was going to go away in a week or two. And so, you know, we canceled certain services, we reduced certain services. We just basically trimmed as much of the operational costs as we could to make sure that we took care of our people, our staff, because we knew that we were going to have to rely on them and lean heavily on them during this time. So we feel like that was a really a wise choice on our part that really helped us kind of extend our resources. But I think the biggest question we're asking ourselves right now is, how do we set our church up to properly care and serve our members, our congregation, right, and the community as well? Because even though I think we're still not seeing the full effect of the pandemic for a lot of the individuals in our church, we've been surprised that we haven't heard a lot of, hey, I lost my job, you know. So I mean, thank God that people are still able to work, but I think we're going to start seeing that. I think the effects of that, I think, as people are challenged by, you know, trying to get unemployment or what other government services, I think they're going to find themselves just in a place of struggle financially, maybe even with regard to their rent or food, whatever the case may be. So we started already the process of, hey, let's set ourselves up so that it's easy for people to ask for help. And then let's ask those who are willing to help so that we have them readily and available to respond to that help. So we're doing that now, and we're building kind of a community database of people in need and then people who want to help. And we've been pushing, you know, we've always believed in the priesthood of all believers. We've been a life group church for many years. And so we've been heavily relying on our life group leaders and our what we call our dream teamers to actually keep everybody engaged. And so far that's been working.
That's great. I think it's probably folly to have a conversation right now on how are we going to open up, because we don't have any idea what we're going to do. And certainly, John, churches like yours, you know, you're not going to go back to Franklin anytime soon. There's no way the district is going to let that happen. So I want to maybe, I mean, that's probably another conversation at another time once we have clearer goals. I mean, Robert, you and I were talking today about churches in you know, the Texas area that might be open as soon as Mother's Day, but that's not happening in California. So I'm going to save that for another time. I want to hit on 2 things real quick before we jump into the winter conversation. The Praxis article talked about 2 different things. One is to maximize your runway so that you have plenty of time to go and get off the ground for whatever's next. And then organizing for resilience. How are you thinking through, as you think about your staff team, or even your organizational structure, how are you doing either one of those things, maximizing the runway or organizing for resilience? John, you seem to have some ideas, at least questions. You had the 3 F's, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I did 3 F's, exactly. Yeah, we're actually just going under a new kind of staff restructuring. Probably going to be our 2nd or 3rd since this whole pandemic started. It's really been a kind of all hands on deck, but right now it feels like we're getting to terms to what teams are being formed and what's moving forward, and kind of hitting on, you know, the first question a little more. You know, we started a journey about 2 years ago asking ourselves the question, what would happen if we could no longer meet on Sundays? And that's where we started this kind of house church journey. And so it feels like what we're doing now has just been a long time coming, where the Sunday experience is no longer the priority for our community, at least, and that the structures of what it did for our community, the kind of, I heard one church leader call it that Sundays were in a way for believers to subcontract their faith into a day and forget about it the rest of the week. And it feels like everything's been reversed and turned on its head. And so our staff have really had to come around that idea and kind of break off the ideas that Sunday is no longer the big thing. And, you know, we're moving from, the priorities are moving from a place that we gather to carrying the presence of God wherever we go. And so the structures that were helpful before, I think what's happening right now, and I'm kind of speaking in a couple of things now, but what's happening now is I love the analogy of the winter, because it's moving at a really quick pace, though. It's, you know, the blizzard is blowing through right now, and we're going to, you know, be in this hyper winter environment for, I think, quite a while. And so for our staff, it's preparing them obviously for harsh realities that we're most likely going to face. We hope, you know, we come out of this on the other end healthier and stronger and more connected than ever. But there's kind of a resiliency that we're putting into our staff now. It feels like we're leading like a wartime leadership. It's like how we led before is, you know, was helpful and necessary, and our staff are having to draw upon everything we've placed in them and called them to be. And now it's like, okay, it's time for battle. It's wartime leadership now. It's not okay, hey, let's have kind of a sidebar meeting. We don't have the ability to, you know, like Jaci was talking about Zoom fatigue right now. You know, it's really hard leading the staff right now in the midst of a Zoom environment. You don't have that banter. You don't have like the relief valves, the pressure relief valves when a tense conversation happens. It's kind of like leave meeting. You get the only thing you see when things are going well, you get these thumbs up, and it's like, well, what does that mean? You know, I need feedback. We need some banter here. And so it's kind of, you know, we have a younger staff, and so I think it's, for some of them, this is the hardest thing they've ever experienced, and across the board, even those that are seasoned, this is the hardest thing they've ever experienced. So I think it's releasing, grieving what was, in order to grab onto what's forward now. So I kind of spoken a lot there, Eric, but yeah, we're constantly having to reevaluate, constantly having to kind of pivot right now, and it feels like that's going to be for a little while, for sure.
Beth, you and I were talking yesterday about having to, like, you were realizing you were having higher level conversations with Daniel about maybe this incoming winter, and that you hadn't brought your staff along. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, and I'm glad, John, you just said some of those things, because you've given some language to, I think, what some of my struggle has been in this. We have spent years working really hard and finally succeeding in having a very collaborative approach to nearly everything that we do. Like that, even moving to the collaborative model of senior leadership was a very natural thing for us to do, because it's kind of the way that we've run along for many, many years now. This has thrown us completely to the opposite side, where I think Daniel and I realized really quickly, like, we cannot collaborate with the rest of the team the way that we have on so many things. So, but we didn't have language for that until about sort of 4 or 5 weeks in, where suddenly we realized we're having to just make decisions and make calls and then tell people, this is what you're doing and this is how you need to do it. And it feels so unnatural to both of us to do that. It's just not the way that we're even like cut out to lead. And I would say, like, I'm kind of struggling in that regard, because it just feels that, you know, the wartime model sounds right, but within a wartime model, people rise and they become these generals, these leaders, and the way that they have to operate is very kind of dogmatic. And those are areas where I have to say I'm kind of struggling. And for a staff that we've hired, staff who are collaborative, and that's the way that they work and it's the way they thrive. And so to now be in positions where they're just being sort of told, this is what to do and this is how to do it and this is when it needs to get done by, and next week it might change and we'll tell you something else. That's been a tough transition for us that we're still honestly working through.
Yeah, I just to reiterate again on some of this, I really appreciate that, Beth. That's really helpful when you have that like kind of revelation and that knowledge of that, it's great. What we're experiencing too is whatever weaknesses we had before are being exposed even greater. Like the pressure is really just exposing. So the questions we're asking ourselves as leaders right now, are we having hard conversations? Are we not beating around the bush here? Are we addressing things that need to be addressed? Are we not letting seeds of distrust or disunity start coming in and calling things out? And so, and we're seeing wherever there's, we all deal with it, wherever there's unhealth, whether there's emotional unhealth, whatever there's, things that people are processing, this season right now is really just highlighting that. It doesn't mean that people are necessarily inherently bad. It's not like, oh, whatever was there is now just coming out. I think it's just the environment is really exposing weaknesses, and it's shifting. So for us, like communications for us was like, okay, yeah, we're good at communicating. We have a communications person, and they're kind of doing their thing on social media. And now like everything is communication. It's like, if you don't have a healthy communication system, if you don't have healthy internal, external communication in your organization, if there's not a process that's been in place, I mean, that person that all of a sudden was kind of, hey, can you get this email out? Can you get the stuff out? Is like under so much pressure. And so that rising to the occasion, that general style leadership, that, hey, this is what has to be done. I don't need you to, think I'm being mean about it, but this is we don't have time to like navigate this in a relational way and by committee. And that's really hard. And I don't think that's going to be forever. Even now, I think that's the blizzard to winter transition. We're feeling that, kind of wait a little bit now, but I think there's still some tumultuous times for sure ahead.
I want to transition to the second part of our conversation, but I do want to give a citywide endorsement that I think one of the best facilitators I've ever been around is Jaci Anderson at Good Critical Conversations. She's really good at it. So if anybody needs help, she's got nothing else going on. She'd be really happy to help, take a half day and, volunteer her time. I'm going to have a critical conversation with her after this Zoom call. So we are in the middle of this blizzard. None of us have ever done it before. I got 5 kids at home on Chromebooks, my wife trying to teach, and it's crazy, right? Not only do we have this insanity in our workplace, but we also have kids. I mean, you're in your garage, John. Jaci, I have no idea where you are.
Garage is my garage.
Garage, all right. And Robert.
We got nice looking garages, Jaci.
Robert.
Oh, there's the bikes.
Oh, nice work.
There's the rafters and the laundry. The laundry's right there. So.
Yeah,
nice.
It's a hybrid.
Well, Robert is the only one who is an empty nester. So he's got this quiet house.
Oh my gosh.
In every way. So I'm actually going to pass the mic to Robert because he's come across some great questions that he's using as they look at the long term, the winter that we're heading into. Robert, would you share those, and then we'll pick a couple of them to discuss.
Yeah, let me share my screen real quick. Okay, hopefully you guys can see those 5 questions there. It's interesting when Beth, you and John were talking about how, you're kind of worried about that general leadership because we have this idea of what generals are, right? And how they
Right.
lead, and they're kind of staunch and rigid and all of that. But generals are only the ones who execute the strategy, right? So I think for us, we're trying to even look beyond that and say, how do we continue to convey our mission and our vision to our staff so that we lead them toward that, right? So we're trying to be, in fact, very non-tactical. We're trying to stay away from kind of tactical decisions and just stay at the very high level, strategic, stay focused on our mission and vision. Be okay with the fact that we have no idea what our numbers look like. And honestly, I don't know that we really care right now. Right now, we just want to make sure that we are providing a place for people to connect with the Word of God, but also to connect with each other, right? Our mission at our church is to offer hope, to ignite hearts, and to help people live in freedom. And we feel like that's become even more relevant now. And our vision is to basically empower people to live out their redemptive purpose in their circles of influence. That's our vision. So even more so now, we want them to live out that redemptive purpose in their families and in their neighborhoods and their communities. So we feel like our mission and our vision, this is a question we've asked ourselves, is it become more or less relevant? Because I do know in my work with UIWI, I know other churches across the country, and I believe the churches that were more inwardly focused are the ones that are struggling right now. The ones where they believe church was within the four walls are the ones that are being challenged to kind of reach outside of the four walls right now. And so we've always felt like our mission and our vision is always extended beyond the four walls. So I think it's just an important question to ask ourselves, hey, let's make sure that it's still relevant. Now, obviously the gospel is always relevant, right? I was reading an article, I can't remember what it was. They said, the gospel is always relevant, but that doesn't mean that you always are as the church. So we have to make sure that we're staying relevant along with the gospel. The second question, I think, is how do we, and I think, John, maybe you might have alluded to this, how do we maximize our core strengths for the future, right? If any of you have done strengths finders, you realize that, hey, focusing on your weakness or trying to strengthen your weakness doesn't give you as much return as trying to maximize your strengths. So right now we're asking ourselves, hey, what are our core strengths? What have they been? And how do we maximize those now and even into the future? And again, as I kind of alluded to, for us, we have been a church that believes in the priesthood of all believers, and we believe in house churches, life groups, whatever you want to call them. And we've been doing that for a few years, but we feel like that's something we have to push even more so to empower our congregation to actually live out being the church. And again, that's never been any more relevant, I think, than it is today. And then I think this is maybe a practical question as well, but it's also, I think, strategic, is what kinds of things were we giving energy to then being the pre-COVID times, right? That has little or no value now. And I have to ask myself, if it has little or no value now, did it ever, right? It's possible that maybe we were focusing on things and putting resource and energy to things that really at the end of the day didn't really matter. And so I think we have to ask ourselves, what are those things? And should we eliminate those, or maybe how should they transform? Should they look differently for the future? Because certainly coming out of this, I think we're going to have to realign our resources and our energy towards something different. And I think it's if we never ask ourselves, hey, what are those things that have no value and that we're trying to give energy to, and let's kill them, let's just eliminate them. Let's just literally make the decision and say, okay, we're going to stop doing it and we're never going to do that again, at least for now. I think it's important that we ask ourselves that. The other question is, how will we measure, and maybe this is sorry, Eric, this is two questions, so it's not fair, but how will we measure church engagement in the future, and what will they look like? And I think I actually ended up rewriting that at the bottom there. It says, what will gatherings look like in the future, and how will we actually measure church engagement? So I think that one of the things that we don't want to do, especially now since we're all going digital, is we don't want to create more consumerism, where all of our congregation is doing is just consuming the video feed now, just like they were before, potentially, where they were consumers but sitting in a Sunday service. So we need to figure out, how are we going to actually create engagement and not just consumerism, and what is that going to look like, and what will gatherings look like in the future? Are we going to go back to physical gatherings? Are we going to be virtual? Is virtual here to stay? Is there going to be a blend of the two? What does that look like? I do think that we were already moving toward the digital avenue. I think that this next generation is definitely, they're digital natives. They grew up in a digital environment, and so the church of the future, I think, is going to have some huge presence, if it doesn't already, in the digital arena. But I think that we're losing in that space, in that we're not engaging the rest of the world the way that we're engaging our own congregation. If you look at TikTok and some of these and others, it used to be Snapchat, but even when you went into those realms, young people are engaging with content, but it's not the gospel. And so how do we kind of invade those spaces where they exist, and bring the gospel in a way that makes sense, or at least create some level of engagement and conversation? I think we can't be afraid of those conversations. So again, what is that going to look like? Is it going to be a hybrid of a physical gathering, but then we put more emphasis on the virtual gathering, or the virtual reach that we have? So these are, again, kind of the questions that we're asking. I don't pretend to have the answers to any of this stuff. None of us do, I think. But I think they're important questions to answer before we develop a strategy for how we move out of this. Because here's my fear, and it's not a fear just for us, but for my fear for the church in general, is that churches will begin to develop a strategy for how do we get back to where we were.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that was the other question I sent Eric, was, how do we prevent ourselves from wanting to go back to that Egypt experience, the thing that was comfortable, the thing that we knew, right? And so my fear is that a lot of churches will be developing a strategy to just, how do we get back to that, right? How do we go back to the big gatherings? How do we go back to growing? I don't know that that's the right question. That's the right answer, I said, to these questions, and that's the right direction to set a strategy. So I think we have to answer these questions, at least we feel, for ourselves, before we can even think about a strategy, right? Because a strategy is only going to take you to wherever those answers lead. And so until we know that, I don't think we're going to be doing much to try to figure that out.
Yeah, that's really good. Either building off of one of these 5.5 questions, or questions you've had on your own. Jaci, I'd love to give you the mic next. What do you think about these questions? What other questions are you and Barb and the eldership team asking? Take it.
Yeah. Well, obviously what we're talking about is that we are in an adaptive challenge, not a technical challenge. And if we try to apply our previous, technical strategies to our current times, we will find ourselves answering the wrong questions, So I think posturing ourselves toward adaptability has been a lot of the priority, that we've been generating. And I think that does come from having a posture of curiosity. And one of the things that I think is God's provision is leaders who are a non-anxious presence. In A Failure of Nerve, it talks about non-anxious leaders being the immune system to their body. And there's just a lot of toxins flying around, like you said, like that desire to okay, as soon as they lift the ban, we're just going to rush back to the way things used to be, is really a response out of anxiety, and one of the ways that we've been cultivating that non-anxious presence has been to grieve and lament, to name the losses, have space to complain about that to our God, who is our hope, as a way of kind of rinsing and kind of taking our hands off a little bit some of those kind of needs, some of those needs to control, and to have a this concrete foreseeable future. So cultivating that non-anxious presence in our leaders, giving them space. Most of our meetings, we're just connecting with, how are you doing? So people, we don't have the same space we used to metabolize, all the information and all the, different messages that are coming at us. And introducing, we've kind of been coming back to, in the Message version, where Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary, and learn the unforced rhythms of grace." So we've been talking a lot, and again, we're a contemplative charismatic church, but we've been talking about what practices can we put in place that help us change what we are measuring, basically. Are we doing the work of abiding, or are we doing the work of striving? Are we trying to hold on to these expectations of, I got to keep doing as many things as I used to do before? Or are we holding on to an expectation that today I discerned clearly the two things God had for me, and my contentment came out of responding to that? So a lot of it is an internal work, and I think it starts with leaders and changing what we expect, that, hey, your primary job is to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. We're not saying that you should be able to do what you've, this productivity level that, best kept secret we all were dying by, like, we get to shed those things. We get to embrace our humility. We get to say, yeah, like, I wasn't crushing it before, and I'm not crushing it now. And like, I'm not going to come out, skinnier and knowing how to knit and all this stuff. That's bananas. But if we do the work of abiding and say, like, that's our standard, I think we'll posture ourselves towards the creativity that we need to really design the future. Steve Chavarro was talking about, when we're designing and using our, creative strategic approaches, we look for awareness, awareness, application, and adoption. So I think first we have to name what we are aware of is changing before people are even up for adopting something new. We know as leaders, like, the new is happening. But I think the more we talk about what we are lamenting together, people will be like, oh yeah, I think we're allowed to say some of those things weren't giving us the type of discipleship space that we really wanted, or relationships that we really wanted, then we can talk about how do we posture ourselves to be curious about what could be. Then we can move into actually adopting new, forms of presencing ourselves more deeply, in our home sanctuaries and in our neighborhoods, and being the pastors of our blocks again, and things like that.
I love that. That's really helpful, because you're right. It's if we're not the leaders that we need to be, it doesn't matter what questions we're asking, right? I mean, I love the article that I saw a couple of days ago by Dr. Kurt Thompson, where he just talked about, are we observing beauty? And he gave like some very specific things that just argued if we don't have the ability to appreciate beauty that's around us right now, then we're literally not human. And it's not all about pragmatism. And even, I think at one level we want to have the right answers. At like the deeper level, we want the right questions. And at the level you're describing before that, that's even below that, is who are we becoming to even know what the right questions are. So I really like that. We're going to wrap up in a couple minutes, but Beth, I wanted to give you, and then John, and then maybe Robert, just what is one other question that, Beth, we'll start with you, that you and Daniel and the elders are asking right now about this, in this next season?
Yeah, I would even take a step back from that question and say that one of the questions I'm asking is, how on earth do I even get the space to get to those meta kind of questions? Like, I still feel like I'm so in the week to week to week that I can't. Daniel and I would normally take a day away and go somewhere and pray and, read scripture and start doing planning that way. But we can't do that right now. We can't even digitally do it, because it doesn't feel like we have the time or the space that we used to have in order to do that. So I'm personally struggling to feel like I'm not getting ahead or up above enough to be able to ask the meta questions that I do feel are somewhat mine to ask. I will say, you know, I think the elders are stepping more up and in that regard, and that's been helpful. And I think they realize that needs to become more driven by them than by us, then bringing it to them. So I'm sort of expectant and I'm waiting to see if they kind of start leading a bit more in that charge. I feel quite like, well, this is quite a comparison. I feel a bit like Moses in the desert in this one, in that when the people started to complain about wanting to return to Egypt, it's not like he had sort of a strategic plan in place to figure out what the answers and the solutions were. He just, every time he was like, oh Lord, I don't know what to do with these people. What should I do? And then the Lord, you know, provided an answer, go strike a rock. And so I feel like that's going to be much more me. I'm such a present person, more so than a sort of future oriented person. And in a good sense, this is heightening my dependence on I got to go to God for the answers, because there's no way in my own personal limitations and capacities that I'm going to be able to come up with the plan for the future. So all of that sounded like a terrible confession of bad leadership, but it is what it is. And I'm realizing I am who I am. And if God called me to be here for this season, then this is who he called to be here for this season. So
I think we like that answer. John?
Yeah, that was beautiful. Yeah, I think, you know, strategizing solutions, like, you know, we have ideas, we have, you know, perceptions. I think, Robert, I love the question that you had about, I think you said something about the, so we don't repeat, like, what's the Egypt moment right now? What's like what's calling, what don't we want to return to?
yeah.
And I think that seems to be what's weeding out a lot right now. It feels like what for us, what at least is being identified as Egypt, is complacency and spectators, where the platform of the platform, again, we're moving from platform to presence. And I think you spoke into this, Beth, and maybe it was you, Jaci, about just people like having to rise to the occasion. And it feels like we're in this, Darren's spoken about this, but like an Acts 8 moment where you have Philip, who, you know, the potluck manager, all of a sudden turned, you know, evangelist to the Samaritans, to Samaria. And you have like that's not what they expected at all. And so I think we're trusting that God knows how this ends, and we know how this ends. And, you know, posturing ourselves for, I think I'm praying for renewal. I'm praying for revival. I'm praying this is a window into a space that really wakes the church up. We're seeing people evangelize in our community that's never happened. It's opened up incredible opportunity. We have people leading Alpha with their families online, like just because, like, hey, can I be an Alpha host? I just want to do this with my sisters, and they're you know, who are unbelievers, and it's like, gosh, this is, why haven't we thought about this stuff before? Why hasn't this stuff, why did it take this? And but God, you're using this, you're making this beautiful. You, like, it's just exposing that we don't know the way. And so I think right now we're just trying to posture ourselves as open as we can. I think it's going to be a hybrid, you know, many different kinds of hybrid environments for a long time. And I think it's going to be something about the homes. I think it's going to be, I don't know if it's like a return to some kind of, you know, society's bands and classes, Methodist kind of, like, you know, smaller environments, and where it's really, yeah, I think it's going to be an influx and a hybrid moment. But yeah, that's kind of what we're paying attention to right now.
That's good. Robert, you want to, any last words?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Beth, and thank you, yes, for sharing that I think we all realize that, you know, we are not in control, right? And Jaci alluded to that as well, that we need the presence of God in our own lives. I don't care what level leader you are. We have to be on our knees asking God to lead us first, right? If we're not following God, then what are we doing, right? And so we've always been, you know, a spirit-led church. We've always gone to prayer about these things. And, you know, for us, this is really no different. And I think one of the things that we're saying, it's interesting that we've been talking a lot about Moses, but in Exodus 33, Moses says, you know, Lord, if your presence is not there, I don't want to go there, right? And so that's what we're saying right now. Wherever this is leading us, wherever we think we might want to go, we're first and foremost saying, God, if you're not going to be there, we don't want to go. So prevent us from going in that direction. So I think for us, that's a critical piece is that we go to God with, God, where do you want us to go next? Wherever you lead, we will follow, but we don't want to go if your presence isn't already there.
That's great. That's really, I know now what we're going to call this recording, something about Moses. I want to say thank you for taking the afternoon. Jaci, thank you for being here today, and Beth and John from your garage, which looks fantastic. And Robert, thank you for taking time to do this. Yeah, we don't know where this is going to go, but I think the questions that you raised, the postures, and even the questions behind the questions were really, really helpful.